I would say DeSci from the highest level perspective is really about how do we rebuild the healthcare and biotech and medical systems from the ground up in parallel to the existing ones.
Hey, Erum, what's going on?
What's going on? We're here at the Grow Everything podcast where we talk about building the bioeconomy and we resolve our differences.
That's right. What people never hear and probably should never hear is the beef that goes on sometimes behind the scenes, but we do always resolve it. So here we are, ready to dive into another episode.
Yeah, we had a great conversation. Peace is restored in the world of Grow Everything Messaging Lab, but that's why it's wonderful working with you, Karl.
So I feel the same way, Ram.
Yay! Awesome. All right, enough of that. Yeah, there's been really exciting news happening, and you had shared something about protests around research funding. What's going on?
If you pay attention to the news, the current administration proposed some very significant cuts to research. And in a rare display of unity, thousands of American scientists from the most prestigious institutes across the country joined forces to warn Congress that these kinds of budget cuts would do lasting damage to the country's economy, health, and global standing. And I think that the challenge is that so many politicians, and not to pick on anybody too much, don't realize that basic research is the engine of the economy. The stuff that we talk about here on Grow Everything comes from basic research. If you're using a cell phone, the GPS and all the chips in there essentially came from basic research. And the United States has been a leader in high tech because we've invested consistently in this. So this is really no surprise. I think the bigger surprise is the fact that the Trump regime has really decided that they want to do these budget cuts. What's your take on this, Erum?
Yeah, I just hope that these scientists are going to be taken seriously. And unfortunately, I don't know if they will, because in today's times, there's a distrust of science and how it's done. And there's a little bit of like, okay, I see why, because science is covered in jargon. People that don't get educated or they don't know science very deeply, it's hard for them to understand. And then if they don't understand something, they can't trust it. And so I see where people are getting frustrated with science. But like you're saying, it is the backbone of economies. China has been doing such an amazing work when it comes to, let's just focus on the bioeconomy, let alone AI and computation and energy, e-commerce, all of those things that China's doing. They're doing such a great job. But in biotech, they're leaps and bounds more advanced than the United States today. So in order for us Americans to continue being a leader or to surpass them, we need to be investing a lot more money, not cutting. It's just like, math 101, right? The math ain't mathin' in terms of like being able to be a powerhouse. Science gets the truth and the truth will prevail. I hope that these scientists are heard. I don't know what the dynamics of this protest were.
It was more of a petition. An open letter is what it was. But it included 80 Nobel laureates and 50 recipients of the National Medal of Science. And most are members of the National Academies of Sciences. But again, I hate to say it, but some of the people on the other side are so anti-science that means nothing to them. They hate scientists. They hate smart people. I hate to say it that way.
You know what they should do is get together and go to China just for like a meeting, just a summit, a little tease. To be like, oh my God, all these geniuses are going to China. That might get under the craw of some of the American government officials to be like, what the F?
We're going to keep watching this story. I mean, we've mentioned it before, and I think it's really important for us. And if you're a Grow Everything listener, I highly recommend you send a note to your congressperson, your senator, your governor, and let them know that you support science and how important science is in your life. I do this on a regular basis. I get notes back from Kathy Hochul, Dan Goldman, who's my rep, and Chuck Schumer and Kristen Gillibrand. They all get notes from me. It takes 10 minutes to write them and let them know that this kind of stuff matters. I wanted to bring up another just piece of news before we go on. We had interviewed Stephanie Culler, I don't know, a year ago, maybe a while ago. And they just put out a piece in The Scientist where they discussed their My Baby Biome study. And the study is showing that there's rising gut microbial imbalance in babies. What that means is there's missing microbes in their gut microbiome, and that in turn makes them vulnerable to chronic diseases. I thought we talk a lot about microbiome here. We're big fans of Stephanie and the Persephone team. Just thought I would bring it up because I want our listeners to also be aware of this news.
Yeah, it's great that they've done a systematic study and looked at babies in this, scientific method way. Our guest, Momo and Guru of Biome, also talked about how there are microbiome challenges because of babies being born in sterile environments. Even us grown-ups, as we grow in a sterile environment, we're missing microbes, and it's important to understand how that influences our health. And that's another plug for Biome to test your own bodies. They have fecal and blood tests that they run RNA analysis on to be able to see what type of gene expression is actually happening and what allergies you might have and just different dysbiosis that might occur in your body. And then they'll recommend solutions. And I actually took the test. I'm just waiting for my results. I think it takes up to 3 weeks. So I should be getting my results anytime. And I'm happy to share, maybe not my specific results, but what the UX looks like, what I learned, depending on what it reveals. So let's see how much I'll share. But this is all about, if you learn about our microbiome, we'll know where we can fix it. And the earliest we know, in terms of this My Baby Biome study, the better, because then, mothers and fathers can help with interventions early on in life.
Yeah, I agree. I can't wait to get you to talk about your results because I'm going to be super curious. And then that may or may not motivate me to do the same thing. But I think we're all trying to live healthier, happier, better lives. And we've talked a fair amount on the podcast about longevity. You pointed out a story about why longevity is so hot right now. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's so hot right now. All the billionaires are getting in on it, and they have been for quite some time. I mean, they made all this money. So what's next? How long can they ride their lifestyles, right? If you have billions of dollars, there's so much you can do, so much you can experience with that money. So they're pouring money into longevity-focused companies, Biome being one of them. So billionaires like Mark Benioff, Naveen Jain, who is actually the CEO of Biome, they invested in Biome. But then you have billionaires like Mark Andreessen and Matt Damon and Kevin Hart putting money behind Function Health. There's this map we'll share in the show notes, what longevity companies these billionaires are putting money into, just so you can just see where the market is getting funded. And it's incredible. It reached me. I mean, obviously we had Guru and Momo, the CSO and CTO, on our podcast, but the more funding that gets put into longevity, the more research that can happen, the more confidence these companies have to go direct to consumer. And here we are. I mean, we need these innovations to get into the hands of the people. But you know what? They're getting to the hands of billionaires first, and that's fine. If they want to take whatever drugs, if they want to have blood boys and do whatever they need in order to kind of test out theories, as long as it's safe and effective, great. Go for it. I'm all in. I'll be watching. I'll be keeping an eye on it. And if things go well, sign me up.
It's super interesting that this is where the billionaires of today are putting their money. I wish that there was a billionaire that was doing more outrageous, crazy things, kind of like Richard Branson did in the day, sailing a balloon around the world, or, I don't know what other kinds of stunts he pulled, but I always really enjoyed watching what Richard Branson did. And I'm not sure we have anybody who's equivalent to that right now. Elon, sucks up all the air, but he's not really doing anything fun. In my mind. Am I wrong?
Yeah, no, there's people doing certain things. I think Peter Diamandis with the X Prize has put a lot of innovation front and center and helping companies. For example, he partnered with Anusha Ansari to do the X Prize, and that was all for space, or I think commercial space flight, I believe, or just general space. And now Peter Diamandis is focusing on longevity and other things. He has a great podcast. I mean, a little shout out to him and his podcast that's also on YouTube. He recently interviewed a CEO of a humanoid robotics company.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking more of outrageous fun things that billionaires are doing. And that's what I think is missing. We need more fun in this world. And I appreciate all the funding that's going into these challenges because ultimately that ends up benefiting mankind. But we could also use some very light entertainment of people with lots of money doing outrageous things and not just spending their money by sitting at the runway at the Balenciaga show.
Yes, exactly. Oh, 100%. Mainstream people are also getting in on the longevity space. Obviously, all the beauty brands, they're in it. The supplement companies, they're in it. But you and I both listened to the Pivot podcast with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. And recently, Kara's been teasing up her efforts in longevity. She's just teasing it. And he talks about some things that she's been exploring. I don't know if it's a show or a movie or a documentary, but she's going to be spotlighting like longevity therapies, which I think is interesting.
All right, we should try to get her on here. So if she does do that, we should try to get her on here. All right, so let's talk about our guest today, Erum. You met Benji Leibowitz at a Biohacker Day that was hosted by our friend Shelby. Talk about Benji and what it was about him that made you want to bring him on the podcast.
Yes, so the Biohacker Day, it was incredible. Benji kicked off the day with describing his efforts today, Pump.Science, which you'll hear a lot about. And he comes from an organization called Molecule DAO, which you also hear a lot about. And his explanation of the benefit of the platform they created is phenomenal. And you guys will hear all about, you guys will hear his science communication and will be like, wow, this guy, so cool. And so when I met him, and we actually like, when we knew about the Biohacker Day, and we knew Benji was going to be on, you and I were talking about him and you were like, we got to get him on the pod. So I had a mission to like talk to him, but he's super down to earth, so friendly. Like I felt like we went to college together and knew each other for a long time. So I was like, this is going to be a great person to interview and you guys will hear our conversation. And I've heard about him through other people that have been highlighting Pump.Science and his efforts. So I was like, okay, super cool. It was great talking to him at Biohacker Day. I texted you after I met him. I'm like, dude, mission accomplished. Benji wants to be on the pod. And here we are.
I think, there's two things I'll say about this. One is, I think we were kind of on a mission with Benji because we knew about Molecule and we wanted to get someone from Molecule DAO on here. They're, I'd like to think, the pioneers in DeSci. And number two, if you don't know what DeSci is, you might want to listen to the previous episode that we dropped last week, where we took excerpts from interviews that we've done with the leaders in decentralized science to talk about what DAOs are and what decentralized science is. So if you need a quick primer on what that is, just go to your streaming service and look at last week's episode. So I think with that, let's let Benji take it away.
All right, Benji Leibowitz, Pump.Science, Molecule DAO. Welcome to the Grow Everything podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Just introducing me by all the brands I'm associated with.
Yes, of course. Our audience listens to a lot of different topics in science, and a hot topic that we love to talk about is decentralized science. But we want to hear from you first. Can you first define decentralized science and why does it matter for the way research is funded, shared, and advanced today?
Yeah, the more time I spend in DeSci, the more times I have to re-explain what the heck it is. And it's been very interesting to see what lands and what doesn't, and what opens conversations and what just immediately shuts people down and goes, okay, conversation over.
Yeah, blockchain will shut down a conversation.
I would say DeSci, from the highest level perspective, is really about how do we rebuild the healthcare and biotech and medical systems from the ground up in parallel to the existing ones. So Balaji Srinivasan, who's definitely like one of my idols and who I think is one of the greatest like original thinkers of our time, he said that it was easier to start Bitcoin than it was to reform the Federal Reserve. And what he meant by that was the Federal Reserve is so broken, but it's also so ingrained in the existing financial system that it was going to be very difficult to disrupt or change or modify in the ways necessary to improve its function. Rather, it was better to just create something from scratch that was just better from first principles, that would just beat out the old system. And it only took 10 years or so. And now Bitcoin is like already one of the top 5 like world currencies, if you look at it from a value perspective. So this is the framing with which we come to DeSci, which is how do we, rather than try and reform the medical, healthcare, biotech systems, which we know have their flaws. Everybody knows that they have their flaws. Rather than try and reform the systems with policy changes and whatnot, just rebuild a system from the ground up that's better and designed on first principles that will one day beat out the original system and then just eventually become the default.
That's great. So before you were doing Pump.Science, which is how we got to know you, you had been the chief operating officer at Molecule. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about Molecule. What is Molecule? And then what was the catalyst that took you from Molecule to Pump.Science, from decentralized finance to science infrastructure to creating what some would call meme coins for scientific outcomes?
Well, first, I would love to refute the tagline of meme coins for scientific outcomes, if that's okay. But we can get into that after, but we'll pretend to not be offended. But Molecule is focused on tokenizing biotech IP. And so, like in layman's terms, you can think about intellectual property rights as being the foundational source of value in the biotech system. And so any drug that comes to market, it holds its value in its IP. And really what this means is like a patent, right? So a patent to the drug that says you invented this thing, you own it, you own the commercialization rights for it. If anyone buys this drug, you get the royalties and income associated with it. So if those IP rights are transferred to another entity, then now they get those rights. So this happens all the time in biopharma, where a big pharma company will buy out a biotech. And it looks like an acquisition, but really what they're purchasing is the intellectual property that is held within that company. And that's really what gives a drug its value. And so what Molecule is trying to do is tokenize those rights. What that means is rather than a company owning the IP, which is what happens in the normal, regular world, what if you could assign the rights, rather than to a company, to a token on the blockchain, basically like a digital representation of those rights. I want to make sure the audience doesn't like totally get lost in tokens and blockchains, but think about it as like a digital representation of a patent that you could transfer electronically. That's really what Molecule is trying to do at its core: bridge real world rights that are enforceable in a court of law into the digital world where it can be transferred and traded from computer to computer. That's really what Molecule is doing. And so while I was at Molecule, we were trying a bunch of different strategies in terms of how do we find IP in the real world that's valuable and bring it on chain, meaning tokenize it, let people trade it. That's really the goal of Molecule. And when you look at the current user base within crypto, what you find is a lot of traders. You don't find a lot of scientists. There are some, but there's not a ton yet. And so the whole thinking with Pump.Science and why we basically launched that prototype was to cater to the average user that's in crypto. So that was the genesis. How do we simplify this complex system of tokenizing biotech IP to something that is understandable to the average crypto user to increase the total addressable market?
So you're part of building this architecture for like a DeSci ecosystem. What lessons from that chapter most directly shape the way you're approaching Pump.Science today? Is it just to make it more approachable to more people, or is there anything else out for that shift?
Yeah, so I would say that one of the biggest challenges while we're at Molecule were twofold. There were like the technical legal challenges, like how do we actually do this magical cartwheel of bringing legal rights on chain? That was like part of it. But once you have a framework, it's pretty easy to scale, right? You just write into code and you have template legal agreements and people don't need to worry about the details. It's called an assignment agreement in law, where you basically assign rights from one entity to another. But instead of the assignee being a company, it's now a token that's represented by some address and that can be represented digitally. That was the eureka moment of the team. But once you have that set up, it's infrastructure, easy to scale, it's turned into button clicking. Now the question becomes, how do you bring as much value on chain as quickly as possible? That becomes the question of, if you're trying to predict the commercial value of a bunch of biotech assets, how do you bring as much of it as quickly as possible on chain? There's a few different ways you could approach that. You could go to massive companies and try and get them to tokenize their rights. Pretty hard. You know, you've got very, very gray hair traditional management teams and boards who most of them aren't really willing to take the risk. And they also have access to very, very sophisticated liquid capital markets in the stock world. Less so, I would say, like this year than in previous cycles, but traditionally that's any given. If you have a good pitch, you can fundraise from equity capital markets. But the thinking was, if we went for IP that was valuable, but underfunded from traditional funding sources that we could bring a lot of value on chain with low friction. What I mean is cancer drugs are a pretty saturated market. Diabetes drugs, pretty saturated. Alzheimer's, even though one can question the progress being made in these fields, which you can all day long. That's not the question. The question is, which applications of biotech are underserved? Because you're going to have the least amount of friction. You're going to have the most amount of pain in scientists and drug developers to want to get financing, to run studies, to develop their idea. And so we started with longevity. And the reason for that is there really aren't good financing frameworks around funding proper longevity biotech. There's this great meme, and it's like the guy looking back at the girl in the red dress. Do you know that meme?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like his girlfriend standing next to him that's like shocked is life extension. And the girl that he's looking back at is profitable disease indications, right? So this is what happens to every quote unquote longevity biotech, which is they sell themselves as an anti-aging company, and then their investors end up pushing them to go look at oncology, right? Because that is where the financial infrastructure is set up to reward. That's where capitalism in its current state, with all the way that insurance works, the FDA works, is all engineered around treating diseases. And so there is this massive gap in proper health increasing, life extending supplements. You could call them medicines. The lines become blurry, but the idea is the same. How do we increase health rather than think about treating disease? Anyone who is thinking about that from like a biotech perspective is not really getting funded. And on top of that, we actually have pretty strong product market fit within the crypto space of people that just want to live longer, right? You've got a lot of people who have a ton of Bitcoin now and not a ton of time. And they see this techno optimist future and they're like, okay, I'm going to live forever. It takes that like audacious phenotype to really think that you can extend your life. And actually what we see is a lot of people vision aligned between the longevity space and the crypto space. There's another reason for going the longevity route. And that is because if you think about what are the simplest experiments one can possibly run to cater to the typical crypto user, animal alive, animal dead is just the simplest endpoint. You can go run single cell analysis on immune cells and try and present that to a bunch of like crypto traders, and they will have no idea what you're talking about. It is the wrong experiment market fit. And look, the longevity experiments may also not be the optimal experiment market fit, but at least it's simple. And so we're starting with simple. There may be a world in which we go to things that are more entertaining. We've experimented with rotor-rod testing on mice, which is where they like run on a rod and then fall off. We're likely going to explore into nootropics. And so have mice take cognitive tests and then have people trade based on those experiments. But the idea is simple. It's like start with endpoints that are really easy to understand and then increase the complexity over time as more scientists who will actually value the outputs come into the space and like sophisticated traders and all.
Yeah, and before we get into pump science a little bit more, but I was under the impression that you also had some really big investors in Molecule, like Pfizer put up some money, right?
Pfizer Ventures invested in Vita DAO. Vita DAO is like a longevity-focused DAO that spun out of Molecule.
Okay. Now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about pump.science. You talked about that there's very specific pain points associated with traditional research funding, not the least of which is kind of like the current political environment in the United States. But what were the research pain points that you saw at Molecule that pump science is designed to solve? Was there a moment where you're like, there's got to be a better way?
I think that really the exercise with pump science was less so around the perspective of the researcher, which we call the supply side. At the end of the day, it's the market. So you think about it as the supply side and the demand side. The demand side is funding research and the supply side is supplying research and assets and tokenized IP. So the thinking was less around how do we better serve the scientists and actually more how do we serve the people that want to fund the research. That was more of the framing. And when we thought about this, it was how do we run research that is fast, because the attention spans of the traders in crypto are extremely short. They want to see gains and they want to see number go up very quickly. They're very impatient. There's a lot of opportunities in crypto to trade other coins. And so if you are not getting velocity in your tokens, people leave, they lose faith and they go to something else that has more momentum. And so everyone's momentum trading, right? And so the question is, how do you have research that's momentum? A lot of the research that we were trying to look at while I was at Molecule was university-based research. It takes 6 months to initiate and get any results. You're working with the tech transfer offices, and that's a whole 3-month process, typically longer when you're dealing with a company that's trying to finance with crypto, which they've never done before. The number one thing besides simplicity was speed. And so what we wanted to do was run experiments that were just faster. And I think the third thing was the cost. The experiments that we were trying to finance from the Molecule side were extremely expensive. So a typical academic grant is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It seems to be, at least for the most part, that that's going to be difficult to scale. It's just going to be difficult to scale. And so our thinking was, what is the cheapest experiment that we can run that actually is IP generating and valuable? All of this answer boils down to is you have this trilemma, which is speed, cost, and value between any experiment you can run. And actually there's yet another pillar, but don't want to get to it, but it's entertainment, right? What's most entertaining? So it's more like a tetralemma, but I mean, there's a lot of things you're trying to optimize for. But the experiment we landed on was lifespan testing on C. elegans. It is short. It is relatively inexpensive. It is fairly valuable to understand. Does it extend life in a model organism that's been used for centuries in biology? And the thinking with pump science is just to move from model organism to model organism. So you compromise on the time and cost, and you go up in terms of the quality and value with each subsequent experiments to be like levels of a game, where level 1 is the worms, level 2 is the flies, level 3 is the mice, level 4 is humans.
I just love the entertainment part. I'm so glad that you see that as one of the pillars. Speed for, yes, the people that are going to put money into the tokens, but even for the researchers, it's a new way of experimental design. I've been a scientist in the lab working in pharma, and it's so slow. I left because I was just so bored because I just had to do so many high throughput studies, which I know is important, but it was important. Now they may be less high throughput, more precision with the advent of AI coming into designing molecules better. But that aside, it's exciting and you want people to get excited. You need results quickly. And Pump.Science, it took inspiration from another platform called Pump.Fun. But Pump.Science, of course, applies to scientific projects that you mentioned. Just tell us about Pump.Fun really quick, because that was inspirational to you. And can you just paint a picture for us on what someone would actually see or do when they engage with a project on Pump.Science?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I recommend anybody who's listening do is go on their browser and type in pump.fun. And you will land at the most chaotic, confusing, almost, I don't know how else to put it, but almost autistic website you've ever seen. And you might say to yourself, who the heck designed this? Who is this even for? And I think what's very easy to break through all these questions is this application makes $2 million in revenue a day.
Oh, shit. Yeah. Wow. Oof.
So I think it's important to ask the question, why? People love the 24/7 casino. They love it. And they love this interrelation between memetics, which are when you go online and you see memes and you see news stories, et cetera, in the real world. How do you turn that into a casino? That is what Pump.Fun has solved best so far. There have been lots of competition. Some have honestly taken market share, but PumpFun has taken it back. Not only in their product, but in the design of their protocol. They are the kings, and they are being rewarded very heavily by the market because of it. They have product market fit in crypto, which is extremely difficult to generate. Most applications in crypto come and die with each cycle. Crypto is very cyclical, meaning in the bull market, things pump. In the bear market, they dump. And that applications so too follow. It seems like PumpFun will survive because they have such a strong user base. And even when volumes are down, meaning there wasn't much activity, they were still pulling in north of $800,000 a day. So they're killing it. And I think rather than criticize it, I hope that people seek to understand what makes it so addicting and have such strong product market fit. And really it is around this love of traders to play in the casino and have the promise of like a 100x return on their investment. And that's addictive. And so we are trying to replicate that same experience, but with biotech. And so the thinking was, how do we increase the velocity of capital in biotech? You create similar tokenomics, a similar protocol to pump.fund. And so when people look at us, they go, oh, it's meme coins for science. That is absolutely false. These are IP tokens. Every single token launched on our platform has the intellectual property rights associated with the compound and with the data that's generated. But the reality is most of our users don't care. And most of the traders in crypto don't care. And there are people who do care. And for those people, we can absolutely point them to the agreements. They can audit them. We can show them the review of counsel in the US, in Switzerland, that has reviewed all these documents. They're just abstracted away. And what's left is what looks like a meme, where the token value starts at a valuation of $4,500. And the more people that buy, the higher it goes. And what brings people there? FOMO. And especially in longevity. And so the result is we launched last week. We've gotten a really, really impressive amount of fees, an impressive amount of volume. We've had a ton of experiments funded. We've already streamed like 50 worm experiments. We've had 12 fly experiments funded already. And we launched last week. We're about to get our first mouse study funded, all through trading fees. So in 1 week, if you think about the perspective of a scientist who has to otherwise fill out a grant application, which takes months, and then wait for an answer, which takes months, just to be able to run a mouse experiment. In 1 week, we funded a mouse experiment from grant application, which was launching the token, to having a mouse experiment funded was 1 week.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
Now, on Pump.Fund, the way it works, not that I want to spend too much time on it, but basically, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone can launch a meme coin. It reaches a certain volume or a certain monetary value, and then it can graduate into the Solana blockchain or something like that. Is that correct? And just so that our users understand, is there a similar graduation mechanism, or is it just the money goes to the experiment?
Yeah, great questions. So we can get into the protocol design. Want to be super careful that we don't go too deep. But for those who are really interested in the mechanics, we can absolutely get into it. When you launch a compound on Pump Science, what you are doing is you are actually reserving CAS numbers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with CAS numbers, but it's basically a unique identifier for a compound. Rapamycin has a CAS number, metformin has a CAS number, caffeine is a CAS number. Basically anything you can order from Sigma Aldrich, Apex Bio, MedChem Express, one of these very common chemical suppliers, has a CAS number. And so the way we think about this is CAS numbers are the new index for the IP system. And so what I mean is when a patent issuer wants to issue a patent, they say, is this novel? The way we determine novelty is, does it have a new CAS number? There can only be one token per CAS number, therefore per compound. So rapamycin can only be launched once. Metformin can only be launched once. And so this creates a frenzy to like launch the compounds that we think have promise because only one person can do it. So it's first come, first serve. And so when you launch the token, you type in the compound name, we pull the CAS number for it, and then you launch a token. It's super easy and abstracted away from the user. All you do is type in the compound name, upload a picture of it, or we can even pull the picture for you from the suppliers' websites. And you pay a tiny amount of SOL. And that really is to prevent spam. If we made it perfectly free, then people would just reserve everything. So you need to prevent IP trolls, right? Which is the analogous term in the real world IP system. And so you charge a small amount to prevent that trolling. They pay a small amount of SOL tokens. They click a button and it launches a token on what's called a bonding curve. A bonding curve is a primary token issuance market. What that means is it's an autonomous market. It's just code that lives on the blockchain where you send it Solana tokens and it sends you back tokens in that compound. So we launched rapamycin last week. The rapamycin got issued from a bonding curve. What that means is 80% of the token supply is just like in this code. And the only way you can get it out is if you pay for it in SOL tokens. And it starts at a low valuation. You have to pay very little SOL to get a lot of the tokens out. But the more people that buy, the more the price increases. And the harder it gets to be able to get the same amount of tokens out. It's basically this autonomous market where it issues the tokens by people putting in SOL, which you can think of as cash. You can think of as money. And so once a certain amount of money has been collected, then we take all that money, we migrate it, we basically move it over to a new market that's more efficient. What I mean is in trading, whenever you place a buy or a sell order, you want to make sure that the price of the asset doesn't move too much. This is called slippage. Like when you go buy and sell stocks, maybe the average person will not realize that like they're technically moving the market price a little bit because they're not trading very much volume. But if you're a hedge fund and you're moving tens of millions of dollars, you can often move the price of the asset like 5%. What we want to make sure is that people can get in and out of their positions in a new market without moving the price too much. And so we take all the liquidity. It actually doesn't all go to the research. Most of it stays in the market for trading. What does go to the research is the small trading fee that's applied with each trade. So with each buy and sell, we take a small percentage, and that's actually what goes to the research. So we're in essence monetizing the attention, because the more people that are trading, the more funding that's acquired. If you think about it from like the biotech system, like you do a fundraising round, you raise $5 million to go run your IND enabling studies, right? You don't think about it as like a liquid market for equity in your company where every time somebody trades, the company gets money to operate. It's a completely different system for de-risking biotech assets, where rather than ask VCs to put up all the money at risk at the beginning, you de-risk iteratively, but you also acquire more and more capital iteratively. I'm super excited about this model for biotech because rather than quantized, discrete de-risking events, it becomes this much more continuous, iterative de-risking event that also is much more capital efficient. So you don't have to put up millions, tens of millions of dollars to de-risk an asset. You put up hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, $500, right? Like way less money to de-risk it. And the operating costs are lower because we handle the coordination with all the different labs. It really just comes down to marketing, right? Like that's really where this whole thing bottoms out, is attention, right? And so a lot of the people that have launched compounds are now coming to us and being like, how do we get more funding? And so you need to start marketing the token to people who will increase the attention for it to get more purchases to fund it. That's really where we're trying to reduce biotech to an attention war where anyone can participate, where it's completely democratized, anyone can participate. I hope it's starting to click a bit.
Yeah. Again, it boils down to entertainment. The whole 24/7 casino, the meme coins just being like an empty vessel, which you guys are creating are like patent coins. So there's actually substance there. And to be able to somehow capture that 24/7 casino of Pump.Fun and these other meme coins and bring it to Pump.Science and this model, and it actually has scientific advancement is, to me, exciting. I am a nerd, so like I'm not just trying to make a huge buck, I'm trying to make impact too, right? And then this is what your model offers, which is very, very exciting.
And you're not alone. And so what a lot of our user base are the former traders from Pump Fun who got burned over there by the rug pulls, by the crime that goes on there. And they're missing that sense of fulfillment That's what they want. Many of them aren't scientists, but they're like, finally, something real. Something I'm excited to tell my partner about or my friend about versus the 10th doggy coin of the day. So, I mean, there's like 50,000 minted a day tokens on Solana. It's ridiculous. So we're not here to criticize the casino. There's no judgment. But to your point, if we can redirect the energy and the attention to something that has real world value, that positively impacts humanity, creates data and assets that can actually make us healthier, why would we not try to do that?
So you guys just launched recently, based on the work that you previously did. What have you learned about getting researchers, investors, and the public? I mean, the public, it's definitely going to be around entertainment, but how do you get the researchers and the investors to go, you know what, this scientific vision is something I can stand behind?
It is difficult. And what we have done to try and simplify things, they're in the business of predicting attention. That's what the meme coin game is. It's also what we've reduced biotech to, is an attention game. What we're trying to do is tie the data quality to the attention. So if you go to pump.science, you click the all button to look at all the tokens, and you look at the default sort. It's sorted by data quality, meaning the better a compound performs in all the animals, the higher it's sorted. So this is one vector of attention, is it comes to the top of the feed, so to speak, if it's a top performer. Second is we have a game called King of the Pill. And what King of the Pill is the top performers of a compound in each animal. So if you extend life the most in the worms, you get King of the Pill. If you extend life the most in flies, you get King of the Pill, etc. And so basically the holders of the tokens in King of the Pill get airdrops of every new token that's launched on the platform. So we are directly rewarding people who submit or fund the compounds that perform best in the animals. So that is the game that we're trying to create, is find the King of the Pill, find the compound that extends life most in each animal. And so you create much more of a near-term game before you think about commercializing physical products in the real world. Because again, the attention spans are short. It takes long to like manufacture. And so we want to make the short-term game that has rewards associated with it. And so that's why we created this King of the Pill. So that's a short term. But the long term, of course, is physical productization. So either partnering with existing brands who sell these compounds and ideally like either getting a royalty on those product sales and putting that into the token market, or having affiliate links and having the affiliate fees go into the token market as well. I think number 3 is getting prominent scientists talking about these compounds. And so Brian Johnson is talking about a compound, it's more likely to be valuable than if he's not talking about a compound, only because he's a vector of attention. This is how our traders think, and honestly, where we think that the market is going in terms of what's going to be valuable on platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm going back to this entertainment, making it fun. The first time I was introduced to pump.science, I was at like a biotech retreat, and a Solana maxi, I don't know if you know Ryan Bethencourt, introduced it to us, and we were like just like watching it. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And what really attracted me to pump.science was the fact that there was like a video feed of these mice. They were like trying to like run and hold on and have this endurance test. And it was mesmerizing. Talk a little bit more about your video. If there's an AI machine vision thing going on, talk about that part.
Yeah. So basically, I think the number one thing that sets us apart in the DeSci space, of which there are a lot of projects, is that we are showing you the science. And I think this actually is what differentiates DeSci from traditional biotech, is all the experimentation, data generation, et cetera, is behind closed doors in biotech. And that has to do with the way IP is treated. IP is held close to your chest, obviously behind firewalls. It's seen as the secret sauce. What having tokenized ownership basically over these compounds gives you is the incentive to actually market your experiments, right? Because it becomes an attention game. And so if anyone can come and buy in, now you have this massive incentive to just show everything you're doing can be completely transparent, because if the asset is valuable, you should be able to show it. And if you can show it, then people will be excited about it and hopefully buy in. So I know this is a subtle point, but I think this is potentially like the key insight for why DeSci will win. Because when you have open capital markets, you also have massive collaboration opportunities because everyone can buy in. And so even between the different scientists on our platform, they're all trading each other's tokens, right? They're hedging their bets, like in case somebody else has a better idea than them. You don't think about this in academic research or in biotech where like everyone's just like playing their own game because it's so difficult to value transfer. But when you can share in the upside, it completely changes how scientists collaborate. And so this will be a way better collaboration engine, without a doubt, because there's a direct incentive too. And it's super low friction to collaborating. The reason why we make the data so transparent is to create trust. The number one criticism we get is that we're just a scam. We're pump fun, but disguising ourselves as a science project, or that we're not actually doing science, right? So these are a lot of the criticisms. It's just around how do we know you're actually doing the science? And the best way is to show it. But the live streaming component is also massive. You can, at any point, go onto Pump Science and watch experiments. That also makes it like a new feed. We're trying to essentially create the new social feed. And so rather than going on X or Instagram or whatever, this is the place you go to understand what supplements, drugs will extend your life, watch the experiments in real time, trade off of them. The whole system's financialized. But yeah, we want this to basically be the entertainment layer. Like this is the game that I think many people want to play, but can't. The game of life.
I was going to say, like, live, dead, right? But there's health span and lifespan. So to be able to understand that these model organisms or the mice or the worms are actually functioning at a high degree, they're very active. And of course, you can still see that with computer vision. And I know that you want to keep things simple to start, but have you thought about it? I'm thinking, with biotech hat, you do have to see what's going on in the body, that there's vibrancy there or vitality there, not just being alive.
100%. I think it's a great point. And there's different framings of this. So one is the entertainment perspective. It's not very exciting to watch a bunch of animals slowly die. So how do you make it more engaging in the short term? You put them to tests. You have competitions. You have races. You have you could call it a health span assay, a functional readout. That makes it much more exciting in the short term. That's what we're doing with both the mice and the flies. And so the first fly experiments we ran, you just watch them on a live stream as they slowly die. And like even ourselves, we were looking at this being like, this isn't going to go viral. And so what we did with iteration number 2 is it's called a negative geotaxy assay. And it's basically just a fly race. And so you slam the tube of flies to the ground and they run up. And then we measured their speed with computer vision. And we calculated like basically which group won based on average speed of the flies in the tube. And so that can become like a new substrate for speculation. In the short term, it's much more fun. We've enabled leverage trading on it. So you can basically take a binary bet. We're trying to make science properly degenerate, but also productive. It can hit all of these different checkboxes. Just because it's degenerate doesn't mean it's not beneficial, or it doesn't mean it can't be fun, right? So we're trying to make it all of these things rather than like 2 out of 3 or et cetera, et cetera. So another way to think about this distinction between health span and lifespan is lifespan is the price and health span is the leading indicator. So if you're a trader and you're trying to predict which compound is going to extend the life the most in this animal, you might look at these different health span assays, right? In the short term that show that you're either increasing or decreasing health span with these compounds as a way to predict whether or not they'll live longer. If you talk to any deep longevity scientist, they will tell you the same thing, which is you cannot increase lifespan unless you're increasing health span. So you might as well just measure health span in the short term, get a faster readout, and also be able to make trading decisions better.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thinking ahead, are there areas that you're really personally excited to see get traction? Or what are some fields that you think are going to blow up on Pump Science? Areas of longevity, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm really excited about performance enhancement. And I'm really excited about nootropics because I think what we're fundamentally realizing is death is a problem in the future. Because it's not right in front of people, it's much less on their mind. And so trying to sell them a problem for tomorrow, they just don't feel as much pain. Their willingness to pay, their willingness to engage is just much lower. But what they do want today is to have an edge, right? To be able to think better, to be able to feel better, to be stronger, to run faster. So how do we turn longevity into today's problem versus tomorrow's problem? And I think this is something like Brian Johnson's totally thinking about too. How do I look better today, right? There's different ways of framing this, but it's like a lot of it's vanity. A lot of it is cognition and how do I make more money today by thinking better and having a better brain? How do we make these problems of longevity more short term? That's what I'm particularly excited about in this model. But we will see. And the cool part is this is a completely open system. People are coming to us with a ton of ideas. Right after this, I'm getting on a call with a psychedelics group that wants to launch psychedelics and give them to the mice and see how it affects their anxiety and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, we're almost out of time, but can we do some quick fire questions?
Absolutely.
All right, time for the quick fire questions. Here we go. All right, so who is the most underrated scientist in history? And you can also say who's the most overrated scientist in history too. I know we had a conversation about that.
I think underrated scientist is Alexander Shulgin. And I would say most overrated scientist is Francis Crick.
Snap.
Oh, wow.
Awesome.
Okay, so if Pump Science could fund one moonshot today, what would it be?
I would say a decentralized clinical trial on omeprazole for longevity.
Amazing.
Cool. All right. Critics say this is science as a meme coin, but what's your one-line comeback when they say it?
Every token launched on our platform has real-world legal rights to the intellectual property generated on our platform.
Amazing. Okay, what's your favorite non-science hobby that keeps you creative?
I would say golf, only because to me, like golf is actually my artistic outlet. I see like every shot you hit as like you have to visualize it in your head in as extreme detail as you possibly can in order to execute it. If you don't, you hit it in the water. And so, yeah, I see that as my like artistic outlet.
All right. Well, Benji, before we go, like, how does someone get started to participate in Pump.Science? Is it just going on the website and there's an onboarding process? What do we do?
Our onboarding process is pretty bad. And I apologize for that because our first target user are existing traders in Solana. What I would recommend anybody do who is curious about the space and who's watching the prices of all these tokens go up like crazy and just sitting on the sidelines is learn about it and put your hands to keyboard. Basically, put in a little bit of money, nothing that you're unwilling to lose, $5, $10, and go buy some tokens, right? I'm not going to tell you which tokens to buy, but use the technology before making assumptions and calling it all a scam and writing it off. Because without a doubt, crypto is going to take over the entire financial system, without a doubt. And so one can either be on the right side of history or the wrong side of history. I would encourage people to just dabble, use the technology, make a wallet, go use Ethereum, go use Solana, go use all these other chains. Just use the technology, try it. It's fun. It's difficult to get used to. The onboarding processes are not easy, but it is worth the pot of gold on the other side.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Benji, so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Really appreciate it. It was great to meet you.
It was great to meet. I really appreciate the time as well, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you. See you soon. Karl, what do you think of that episode?
Look, I was super excited for having Benji on. And one of the things that I think should be clear to people is that even though you mentioned, Erum, that we've got billions of dollars being poured into longevity science by billionaires, longevity funding in academia is scarce. And at the same time, crypto investors are all in on this. So Benji has tapped into this dynamic where here's an area that a large number of people are interested in, but the money's not there. But there are people with money that are interested in it. So he's working that dynamic. I thought it was super smart. What did you think?
Yeah, his approach is incredible. When I first experienced Pump.Science, I was like, oh, this is so fun. This is so cool. This is what science needs. You were talking earlier in the intro commentary about we need more fun in this world. And people love meme coins because it's just fun. But I said it again. Sorry, Benji, but I know we don't want to equate Pump.Science with meme coins, but the aesthetic kind of lends itself to it in terms of the UX of Pump.Science. But anyway, it's fun. How do we bring actual beneficial scientific work that's happening and put some fun into it And so when we are putting money into any type of token system, there is value being generated. It's not just going into the ether. It's not just betting and random. No one's going to be pulling a rug. I'm starting to learn a lot about the DeSci terminology. So we don't want to get rugged by some meme coin creator who just decides to take all of our money and run, which is what happens in that world, but not here. Here, we all get a share of an IP that's generated, and we are all incentivized to see, will this science work and what will it reveal? And I just really loved how Benji laid it all out for us.
I agree. There's two things I want to say. One is, he basically laid out this idea for an alternate system for de-risking science while increasing investment in science. Clearly, there's a huge audience for that. We did talk about Pump.Fund, which is a really insane meme coin site. I think that if anybody is listening to this that has no idea what Pump.Fund is, just go and plug it into your browser and take a look. It's crazy. And that's this crazy entertainment site where people launch meme coins and they reach a certain market cap, and then they can go onto the Solana chain system. And it does make it a lot more fun. I think it makes it more interesting. So as we said at the beginning, we need more of that.
Yeah. And then into the alternate system, it's so amazing how he drew the parallel between DeFi and how there's a parallel system being created. It's not trying to change the current financial institution, but creating one alongside it. So DeSci has an opportunity to build a healthcare system alongside the existing one. And in the United States, a healthcare system is very complex, and different insurance companies are involved. Just obviously the prescribing medication, keeping track of medication, sticking with different systems, changing to different healthcare systems. It's very complex. So to build a system in parallel to the existing one that might not be as efficient, and seeing how many people can come over to the new system, it's going to be very interesting to see. Community is a big part of that. How do we sing the song of DeSci? And you're a listener hearing it. We talk about it a lot. And we want to, convince you about this being one methodology of having a incentivized system of benefits of goods and services. This is one way of doing it. And if you were to build a system from scratch with the current technology we have today, how would we do it? So I think that's a good one. And he talked a lot about entertainment, which you mentioned right now. And we got to make things more entertaining.
It's clear there's two worlds. There's in real life and there's entertainment. And one of the things we've been talking a lot about is the importance of in real life, real experiences, people getting together. And we're big believers in that when it comes to creating community and advancing the science that way. But I think that from a funding point of view, Benji nails it on the head in saying that people who want to invest, they're looking for entertainment. And it seems like it's working. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this evolves. So then our question to our listeners is DeSci going to win? And if so, how? Let us know. What do you think? I'm super curious.
Amazing. So we have another great episode lined up for you. And for any of you that will be in London for the BioFab Fair, we're excited to see you there. If you're attending or thinking of attending, please sign up. We have a promo code for all of our listeners to come to the BioFab Fair. Just use the promo code GROW10 for a discount.
Yeah, please listen to us on YouTube, subscribe and like. We get a lot of comments on YouTube. We'd love you to be a member. And that's the pod.